Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm James, that's Katie, and of course that makes this episode 55 of the Circles and Squares PlayStation podcast. An episode where Kate is here with me, but again, I am the only face in the box, and we're here with Kate being this sort of small circular photo of yourself. But you know what? It's gonna be fine. We're gonna hang in there. We're gonna make it through. And yeah.
That's right. You know what? Yeah, I misplaced my webcam for today. Just some really great admin work going on my side. But I will say to everybody, I did wave when you said my name, so
The tradition continues,
the
so it's
tradition
okay.
continues. And we'll be back, next week. So,
Yeah, next time you'll have the camera back, hopefully, but that's
mhm.
okay. We'll push through today. Speaking of next week, we obviously do an episode every week, but next week we're going to have a special bonus episode we're recording in the middle of the week as well, because we just saw the Uncharted movie super, super late. I know it's only in theaters here for like a couple more days. In fact, I think as of time recording of this podcast, I think it's actually like done now. So we're really last minute on this, but we're planning to do a review episode on that movie. And yeah, just I guess top level thoughts, Kate. Just to give the people a teaser, what did you think of Uncharted?
You know what? As a quick pass through, I gotta say, we went in with very low expectations. We'd
Yeah.
seen all the drama about it online. We went in, we're like, this is, gonna be a little rough. I thoroughly enjoyed Uncharted, and the more I think about it after seeing it, the more I like it. I think they did a really good job. And I think a lot of the concerns that people had going in were concerns that, like, I understand based on the trailer, but then when you actually watch the movie, those concerns disappear.
Yeah, you know what? I'm right there with you that I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed the movie. Was it perfect? No, of course not. It's like a popcorn action movie, right? That's sort of
Mhm.
what it is. But it was a good time, and I'm excited to talk to you about it more on that bonus episode. So everyone, watch out on our feed for that. Um, but for today, Kate, let's get into the show because we have a pretty busy one. We're talking, of course, about the games we've been playing to start it off, and then for the second half of the show today, we are talking about what makes a good level up system, and some of our favorite level up systems in video games. So that's always, it's something fun to think about these topics when we get them on the show sometimes. So look forward to that in the second half. But to start off the show today, like I said, we're talking about the games we've been playing, and we both played a game for PlayStation Plus this month. Curse of the Dead Gods. This is a game that's gotten some really good reviews online. It's a roguelike. It's kind of in the vein of a Hades sort of top-down action game, going through rooms, getting power-ups, that kind of thing. From Focus Home Interactive, which is a publisher and Past Tech Games, a developer we hadn't heard of, looked them up before the show. Um, those of Space Run and Masters of Anima fame, if anyone's played those games. But Kate, what did you think of Curse of the Dead Gods? And yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those games where I think it's a good game. I think overall, um, it is more positive than negative, but I think for me, I didn't enjoy this game as much as I was hoping I would. I went in with pretty high expectations, It I think to its detriment a little bit gets compared to Hades a lot. Which is maybe a little unfair, but they came out of around the same time, similar sort of style of game. Hades obviously being, incredible, one of our favorite games that we've played recently. And Curse of the Dead Gods, I think it doesn't have the manpower behind it like Hades does. And I think it's not a bad game. I could see myself sinking some time into it potentially. But my biggest problem with this game is that there's just so many other roguelikes that I would rather put my time into. And the aesthetic of this was really neat for me. I like the kind of god Aztec sort of thing going on, maybe a little bit of like a Lovecraft kind of feel with some darker horror parts to it. And it seemed really appealing, but it just kind of fell a little bit flat for me. And I think I'm just a little bit more disappointed than anything else, if
Hmm.
that sounds a little harsh.
I don't know. Like, I can see where you're coming from, and especially like coming off of playing something like Hades that we both loved so much, and that's like many people would consider being the pinnacle of this kind of genre. It's sort of hard to go
Mhm.
in with that in your mind, but I don't know. I'm with you. I think that I'm in general maybe slightly let down on this game based on like I guess, my expectations going in, but I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. And the more that I played of it, I think we played roughly, I guess, the same amount. We were talking the other day, and we both sort of completed, I think, 4 runs, right? Is
Mhm.
what we were saying. And, I grew to like it a little bit more as I played. I think for me, the game itself is fun and it does feel good, and the enemies are, it's interesting, and some of the weapons are kind of cool, and maybe we'll get into that. But I think that if you like Hades, you would probably enjoy this, but you have to go in just knowing it's not got that same level of polish. Like for me, the one thing I noticed so much, and I think I said this to you maybe on the podcast when we were picking our PS Plus
Mhm.
games, was like, one of the things that's so great about Hades is when you get those weapon varieties and they combine, and it's like, okay, well, I have the Poseidon wave, and then I have the Zeus's lightning, and then when you do your dash, it's like a wave and some lightning comes onto the screen, and it's all,
Mhm.
you know, visually pleasing as well as it is effective as a combat move. And then in this game, there is some synergies you can have. Like you could have a sword as your main weapon, and but the bonuses you get are more like 20% extra damage if you have a gun for your
Yeah.
secondary or something. So it's a lot of like numbers being increased instead of sort of holistic changes to the way you're playing in terms of like the animations and stuff. And then also, I just feel like obviously there's just not quite as much variety in terms at least of what I've unlocked yet. There's quite a few weapons to unlock, but I think they all kind of follow the similar archetypes. So I don't know, like it's just not quite that same level of you know Hades, I would say, is like it's amazing sometimes when you get a new combination for the first time and you're like, holy
Mhm.
shit, this is so broken, like I'm never gonna lose this run, like it's amazing.
Yeah.
And this game doesn't make you feel quite as powerful, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, Hades definitely blows you away, and it's just you're constantly getting cool new things, and I think that's one of the strengths of the roguelite genre, is that you're just constantly being bombarded with new exciting toys to play with, and I think that is the essence of why I think this game is not a bad game. I think it's a solid, like, B tier game for me that I did enjoy playing and I was having a good time, but it just didn't have the level of excitement that I need from this kind of game to wanna stick with it and to be motivated to put the time in because roguelites are very repetitive. That's just the nature of the genre because in essence and Hades is the same and a lot of these games, you're doing the same couple levels, you're fighting the same enemies over and over again, like, there's a huge amount of repetition, but what keeps it exciting and fresh, at least for me, is that, you're constantly getting new things. So with Hades, yeah, it's like, well, I haven't, tried all the boons from this god, and I haven't tried out the combination of like Dionysus and like Ares together, and like what those like combinations can provide. But in this game, I just felt like you said, like a lot of the upgrades are just, increased stats and it doesn't really change how the game feels. And there's definitely some cool weapons you get, but I found a lot of them felt quite similar and that I didn't really change my playstyle very much with what I
Mm.
was using aside from like this is melee versus this is range. Like a lot of the daggers, swords, it all felt very similar and the guns and the bows, the same kind of issue. It was nice to have a ranged option, but it didn't feel like getting a bow was that much different to getting a pistol
Yeah, and
in
I
my
didn't I didn't
experience.
feel the ranged weapons, like the bow and the pistol, to me weren't even that useful. Like you have to kind of hold them down for a while, and yeah, I didn't love the way they felt. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think the other thing too to go along with all the weapons is I think it could have had a little bit more of feedback
Hmm.
for when your weapons connected. I felt it was just a little bit weightless in terms of the combat, and I think the system works very well. I think your dodge, parry. I actually like the stamina system as
Yeah.
a benefit. Like it felt weird at first when you started playing because the stamina system is incredibly restrictive. But I actually grew to like it because I think the game is meant to be played very slowly. Like the comparison to Hades is very surface level, I think, because Hades is a fast-paced game, like, you're encouraged to go balls to the walls and, like, full out carnage action. But in something Drowned Gods is it Dead
Dead
it's
god,
Dead
dead
Gods.
gods, dead
I don't know
gods.
why I always wanna say Drowned Gods, it's just in my mind, but yes, Dead Gods. It's very slow, you're meant to just take it you're meant to approach it very differently, and I had a lot more success once I kinda got into that rhythm, and so I actually think the pillars of the combat are fantastic. I just wish that it was a little bit more varied and that it felt a little bit more satisfying to land those hits.
Mhm. Yeah, I can agree with that for sure. Um, Speaking of systems and the stamina system, I think that it's an interesting way to kind of prevent you from just using, I guess, the strongest moves over and over again, and like relying too much on the dodge, right? So that is interesting. The other system that this game has going on, which I wanted to see if you really thought the same as me, was this: they have this darkness system. So the way the
Mhm.
game kind of works is you have a primary weapon, you have a secondary weapon, you can actually have a third weapon as well if you find one later, and then you also have a torch, because one of the things in this game that makes it unique, I guess, is they have this kind of dark and light system where. If you're standing in the light, I think you do some extra damage, and conversely, if you're standing in the dark, you take extra damage. So there's kind of
Mhm.
lanterns around some of the levels you can light up, and there's other kind of bonuses that you can get later on for both light and dark. But I don't know, if I the more I unpack this system, I feel like and I'd love your take on this. It's a little unnecessary in the sense that I find that a lot of time when combat gets really hectic and the enemies can also put out the torches that you've lit, it kind of gets a little hard to keep track of. And there's this little logo in the bottom of your screen where it kind of changes colors if you're in the light or the dark, but there's oftentimes so much going on, I'm not really paying attention to it, and it ends up being kind of like, I know this system is affecting my combat, but am I really paying that much attention to it? Um, and I just wonder if it's like something superfluous, if they could have designed it differently or put more time into something else. Or how do you feel about the darkness?
Yeah, I feel like my opinion is it's not really set in stone because of the amount of time I've had with the game. I found it was something that on paper was quite interesting, but I didn't really feel like I was playing around it tons
Yeah,
in in the game, and so what it amounted to me a lot of the time was walk in the room, light a couple torches, and then just play the room out, and if the
that's
torches stayed
exactly
lit,
it.
that's great. If they didn't, so be it. I think the light and dark system gets a little bit more interesting because of how it works with the curse system, which maybe we
Hmm.
can talk about after, because it just gives when those interactions change, it can be interesting. But I agree, it just kind of felt like something that was added on, and I like the idea of it also being, complementary to the slower pacing of it, and you're not blazing into the room, you're walking into the room and trying to like sneak to get that torch before you start fighting. And the idea of it was cool, but it just kind of felt like almost like a tedious thing you have to do before you begin the room. And
Yeah,
so but at the same time, I don't know, I could see like maybe that's something that comes into the game a bit more when you progress a bit further and then the challenge increases and that light or dark really does make the difference in combat.
yeah, right, right.
So,
I
I
can
don't
see
know.
that being the case for sure. One thing you did touch on, though, very important, is
Mhm.
is that final system we haven't talked about. Would you like
Yeah.
to explain it for our lovely listeners?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and I guess this is kind of, I would say, the most unique thing that Dead Gods has got going on. One of them maybe there's an underwater level later and someone's been
Could
drowned,
you
but for
imagine
now,
that?
for now they're just dead. But yeah, so you accrue as you go through. So each door you enter into the next area of the map, and then also certain other things can increase your curse meter as well, like getting hit by certain attacks, I believe, or sometimes I think you can increase it for like getting some more upgrades. And so when your curse meter hits full, you get a curse, and it is completely random, as far as I'm aware, as to what curse you receive. And what's interesting about it is it's often a negative and a positive all wrapped into one. So sometimes you'll get a curse, and it's like, oh, the light doesn't actually give you bonus damage anymore, but when you're in the dark, you get like X buff instead. So then you want to stop lighting torches, or you'll get stuff and it's like, you don't get money anymore, but now you can pay for upgrades in a different way, and, like, they're just various things, and, like, the funniest one I ran into is that there's traps throughout the level, there's a lot of environmental hazards as well, and they're kind of come either from these statues or these, like, just things without the level, some of the
Like
decorative
floor
pieces.
sensors and stuff. You'll run
Yeah,
past and like
floor
spears come out
sensors.
of the wall and
Yeah,
those
or
kind of
like
things.
statues will shoot fire, other statues will like, swipe their swords at you, but only some of them activate, and you can pretty tell relatively easily visually if you're paying attention. In the heat of combat, sometimes, you don't notice, but, like, there's only certain ones, but there's one of the curses that's like all statues just wanna fuck you up. So then it's like you're running
I
around.
didn't see that one.
It was so funny. I'm like, you can kinda use it seemed like a bad thing at first, but you can use it to your advantage because they'll also hurt the enemies. So I spent one run just kind of, like, running past statues, and they'd all swing their swords and activate, and it was just, like, ridiculous. So it they the curses are interesting. I feel like sometimes they make a run very memorable because they force you to make decisions to play a certain way. It's like you get a curse and it's like your melee damage is now shit, but your range damage is more. And it's like, well, I better
Mhm,
make
mhm.
it my sole objective to find a gun.
Yeah, right. I think the interesting thing about the curse system too is it's like you can sort of influence how quickly it happens to you. Like you
Mhm.
said, they're not necessarily all bad things. Some of them can actually be quite helpful. Like that one you're talking about where you no longer receive money. I
Mhm.
got one that's similar to that, and it's like I couldn't receive gold from killing enemies, but it would kind of heal me a little bit every time I killed one, or stuff like that. And so if you have a certain build or like you have certain weapons that kind of synergize, it can be kind of good. And like you said, there's other ways you can increase this meter as well. Like you can actually, when you come across like an upgrade station or like a room that gives you a new boon you can buy or something, you can actually, instead of spending gold, you can actually sort of sacrifice blood, which is, I guess, you cut yourself and your curse meter kind of builds up, and you're kind of gambling
Mhm.
that the curse you get won't be so bad, or you'll find another way to lower your curse meter later, and in exchange, like, save your gold and still get a bonus. So it's kind of cool the way you can gamble with the currency a little bit, and it sometimes even pays off and isn't even that bad of a deal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm kind of torn on how I feel about it because on the one hand, I really like that what it does for decision making. Like you said, it's like, "Oh, can I risk getting a little bit more curse? Like, I can't afford this in money, but, like, it would be really helpful. Maybe it's worth it." And I think any kind of system that really makes you stop and think for a second is a good addition to a game. But at the same time, it's so random, and there isn't like, the RNG in the game is very high,
Hmm.
and sometimes that's good because it forces you to use things you wouldn't normally use, and it's good for the longevity of the game in terms of, like, you don't just do the same run every single time, and that's boring. But at the same time, it's kinda tough to make those decisions when it's like, "Well, I have absolutely no idea what the curse will be. I have absolutely no idea what weapon I'm gonna end up with in the next room," because there's not a ton of ways of manipulating it. And I don't wanna keep comparing it to Hades because I think they're a lot more different than they initially seem on the surface. But in Hades, you have, or at least as you progress, you unlock a lot of ways to manipulate what kind of boons you get or what kind of rooms you're going to run into. And you have a decent amount of control. But I feel like in Curse Gods, there isn't that level of control that you can receive. So it's a lot of like, I just hope I get, the
Hmm.
sword I need
Hmm.
in the next room, or I just hope that like this curse isn't bad. And so it works in a sense of like it keeps it as a scary thing that you're scared of these curses because you're powerless to them, but then at the same time, it's like, "Oh, it sucks if you get one that really fucks your run up
You can
and,
get a
like,
run
you're
killed.
doomed," right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
it's interesting when you put it that way for sure. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think I've played enough to really have a great opinion on that. Like it's
mhm,
worked out for me enough, but I could easily see it having
yeah.
not worked out if I played more. I don't know how much more you have to say about this one. I got a couple more quick hit things,
Yeah.
and then I'm kind of out of stuff on this one. But one thing I want to say is I've been playing a lot more games on my headset recently, and this
Mhm.
game, I know you mentioned the atmosphere earlier. It is actually one of my favorite aspects of the game is like having
Mhm.
that headset on. There's a lot of like whispers that happen, and there's like
Oh, yeah.
talking, weird atmosphere, and it's quite creepy. And when you have the surround sound and you can kind of hear it all around, they do a pretty good job with it. And I was pretty blown away
Mhm.
the first couple runs that I did. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is just the setup is kind of cool with this game. Like it's similar to, I guess, the common example we'd go to is Slay the Spire, where you can kind of, you're on a map each level and you can kind of pick the direction you want to go. So you can choose like, oh, do I want to go to a room that has money or like a weapon upgrade or something. But what's cool about it is that when you get to the boss and you beat the boss for the first time, your run's over. But then if you take the same path next time, you can make it up to like the second tier and the second boss. So there's like multiple. It encourages you to do multiple runs, and they get longer as you go. So it's kind of like a intrinsic difficulty thing where your first run will be
Mhm.
shorter, so you don't have to worry about the curse meter as much. But then when you go to do the second tier, you got like twice the amount of levels to do, so you got to be more conscious. And I think that's an interesting way to sort of add some replayability to it and make you build differently as you go into those longer runs.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a smart setup. So yeah, overall, I'm glad I tried it out. Do you think you're gonna keep playing more, or do you think you've had your fill?
You know, honestly, I could see myself doing kind of a run here and there.
Mhm.
It's a really good pick up and play kind of game. You know, like any of these roguelikes I find kind of are. The runs aren't overly long, at least the ones that I've had yet. I don't know if I'm gonna go back a lot. Like I could, it's really 50-50 for me. It
Mhm.
just depends if something else comes along and kind of takes up my time, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely not gonna be beating it or anything like that. Like
Mhm.
there's no way I'll stick with it for that long. But yeah, I feel like probably similar for you. I get the impression you're not
Mhm.
going back too much.
I think it's one of those things where if I picked this up and I hadn't played a ton of other roguelikes in the last couple years, I probably would have played more of it. But I feel like I've had some really heavy hitters lately, like Hades, I enjoyed so much. Skull, the
Hmm.
Hero Slayer was a really big one for me. Dead Cells, like I've just played so many that, like Returnal, even,
Yeah, right.
and I've really gone through that genre quite thoroughly and enjoyed it. And there's even a few more I've got on my list that I want to get around to. And this one for me, it's kind of a negative to it is just the timing isn't great, and it's like when I sit down, am I gonna play Curse of the Dead Gods or am I gonna go back to Elden Ring? Like,
Right, right.
it's not fair for Curse of the Dead Gods, but it's just in the reality, I just feel like it's a good game, but it's not a great
Yeah,
game.
that's fair.
And yeah, it's unfortunate to not be able to have time for good games
Yeah,
always.
no, that's the way it is, right? But
Yeah.
the good thing it was on PS Plus, and the good thing is
Mhm.
you can check it out for free right now if you're interested. And I know we probably had more criticisms than praise, but it generally is fun.
Mhm.
So do check it out if you're interested.
Mhm.
Curse of the Dead Gods. Speaking of roguelikes, Kate, I was playing something, and I actually showed you the other day when we were hanging out a little bit before the movie.
Mhm.
This game is something I was watching. You know, you come across on YouTube sometimes, and it's like top 10 games of X genre or something. And sometimes you just click on it, and you're like, well, you know, gotta kill some time. And I was watching this video, and it was on top 10 strategy RPGs. And so you know, there's Fire Emblem, and there's all this tactics, advanced tactics ogre, all this stuff. And there's the game that starts off the list I was watching was a game called Othercide, something I'd never heard of before, from a developer Lightbulb Crew, who I also never heard of before. Um, and the game really caught my eye, so I kind of just went on PlayStation and I found it was on sale for like way like 75% off or something, and I bought it. And so here we are talking about Other Side, which is I guess the way that I described it to you, I guess before you saw it, is it's kind of like it's very similar to like an XCOM style strategy game, but it's sort of got this horror theme, and you're playing as vampires and some really grotesque sort of slimy looking enemies, I guess you'd call them. But it is a pretty cool game. It is like I said, very XCOM, but the game is just it's so unique. Like I know you noticed it too, and when I showed you, it's got this like striking color scheme where the entire game is literally just black, white, and red. There are no other
Mhm.
colors. It is sometimes to the game's detriment hard to see sort of what's going on. You can sort of miss enemies on the map, but at the same time, it's just really striking and has this unique visual style. And There's a lot of other stuff going for it as well. Like I said, it's very XCOM, but the thing that I like the most about it is it's got this turn system, and as you know, like you're moving your units around a map with a grid, and this game has like an AP system, I think they call it, where every
Mhm.
action you take from moving to attacking to whatever else takes a certain amount from your meter, and um, if you do certain actions, it lines you up on the timeline at the bottom of the screen, and you are able to move again quicker or slower depending what you've done. But the interesting part is like you start with 100 AP on your turn. If you use 50 or less, you recharge to 50 quicker after the, this is hard to explain without visuals, folks.
Yes.
But if you use over 50 AP, so you've got 49 or less remaining, you then have to wait to regenerate all the way to 100 next time. So your turn
Right.
is essentially 2 times as far away.
Yeah, so it's
Um,
putting you in turn order with half the amount of time if you use half of your actions, available actions, or use your full turn and go all the way back to the very end of the line
exactly.
instead of going in the middle. So that is super cool because yeah, sometimes you want to burst and like if I use my whole turn I can kill this enemy and that's like super beneficial, but like, maybe you're just repositioning and so you want to get back to your turn quicker.
Well, that's right, right? And then, like you
Mhm.
said, the burst. So what that would mean is once you're below that 49 threshold, you have no reason not to use all your points. So it's like
Mhm.
you're not gonna be, you're either weaning yourself through a turn and like doing something very light for that minimum amount of points, or you're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna spend all of these at once and do like 4 attacks or something like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you play your turns out. Um, Something that's interesting about this game too is that usually these games I feel you have like a really big party, you have like, I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics, you have like, 8 or 9 characters sometimes, and Fire Emblem the
Mhm.
same thing. I found this game is interesting in the sense that the maps are a lot smaller, and I guess it's kind of like XCOM as well, but this is like literally 3 characters max on your team. And it
Mhm.
and it works out because there's 3 classes that you get through the game. I looked this up. There's only actually one more class that you unlock for your characters, so it's a little disappointing because some of the fun of these games is getting to know the different characters and their moves and stuff. But so this kind of has like there's a swordsman class that you have, and they're very fast melee damage. There's a gunner, which is more of a support, and they have like that Overwatch ability where they'll shoot someone if they're coming for a teammate. And then there's a shield bearer class, which is more like defensive and bump units around the map and whatnot. So there's some good variety among those units, but I definitely think the more you play the game, and if you're to play like the early stages a lot before your characters kind of level up and you can pick some different move sets for them, it is a little bit repetitive at the start of each run, which is something that's a negative for a game that is a roguelite, and
Mhm.
you're kind of restarting. But yeah, it's interesting though. Like, there's so many mechanics that I think they do use to mitigate that. Like, one thing that happens, and the way the progression works in the game is that you have these things called recollections. And there's a few different currencies, but the one that you pay for this for is kind of like every time you complete an objective in your run, you earn a few of these crystals. They're just like, I don't even know what they're called. But essentially, what happens then is you can spend them on these things called recollections, which are like permanent bonuses for your run. So, for example, it could be like, all your characters have 15% more health. Or whenever you get a new character, they start at level 4 instead of level 1, so you don't have to bother grinding them up. And these are things that you can unlock during your run, but then also when you start a new run, they're permanently available to you, and you can choose what to spend the currency you earned of those crystals on for your next run. So you can really, I guess, mitigate going through those early pains depending what you've unlocked from the recollections. So like you could just skip the first area if it's too repetitive, or starting at level 4, your characters do have a more expanded move set than just the basic stuff. And so I would imagine like the further you get into the game, I've only played kind of the first couple of areas, but I would imagine there's quite a bit of variety, and like choosing what to unlock and start with, you could really sort of speed your way through the game, which is nice.
Yeah, so, I mean, this game looked cool. I was pretty into it when you were showing me, and I think the thing that seems the most interesting about it to me is the flexibility. So you're talking about with those crystals, and it's really cool because normally in a game when you get those, like, permanent upgrades, it's like you select it and you buy it, and then you have that forever. your currency's gone, it's been spent, and now you save up for the next thing. And so a lot of times you sit there thinking like, "Oh, do I like, buy this only okay upgrade because it's cheap and then it'll help me every run, or do I wait to save up for this like really impactful upgrade, but then I'm like I don't have anything for right now while I'm like saving up for it." So this crystal system is really cool because it resets every time. Like you're not spending your crystals, you're just allocating them. So it's like for your first run, you get those like couple small things because that's all you can afford. But then when you have the bigger amount of when you have enough for the higher tier stuff, you just take off the small upgrades and put on the big upgrade. And so I think that's really neat because it takes away that like awkward choice of feeling like either
Hmm.
feeling like you're not progressing if you're saving up for something, or that feeling of like I've just bought really shitty things I don't really care about. And so it balances that nicely. And then the flexibility also comes into the AP system seems really cool because in a lot of strategy games, it's like, your options are move character and then attack.
Yeah.
And that's your turn like every time. And like, that's not necessarily a bad system because positioning is important and choosing what attack to use and like it works fine. But this seems really neat in the sense of like everything's just points. So you can move like a couple steps, do a thing that costs, 20 points, then move somewhere else, do another thing, and then move again. And it just seems like there's not really any barrier in terms of how you can choose to do anything. And that to me is like the game has a lot of confidence. Like that's tough to balance just to give you like total free reign.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if that's kind of the reason too they designed it around, a fewer amount of classes compared to
Mhm.
other games because it's easier to maybe, avoid breaking the game with some abilities if you have like all
Mhm.
these different classes and different situations. Um the one other thing I wanted to talk about, which is quickly for this game, which I think is really unique, is the healing system and the way you kind of manage your units.
Mhm.
Because, like I said, you kind of can only take 3 into a battle, but you can have more units than just 3. So the way it works is there's another currency which is essentially it's called vitae. I think it's blood basically because you're vampires, but um, and this is one of my favorite parts is when you can kind of just make new units, and when you do it, it's as press X to germinate a daughter, which is I
Right,
guess
which is the best button prompt
one
ever.
of the greatest prompts. Press X to germinate daughter, but
It's like,
you,
"Oh, I really need context for that one."
yeah, yeah. It's interesting though because when you complete a level in this game, your characters do not heal themselves, and so there's certain moves that you use a percentage of your health to pull them off, or obviously you can take hits, and then you have a pretty good health pool on your characters, but obviously after a battle or two, they're going to be weak, and the only way to heal your units is actually to sacrifice another unit of the same or higher level. So it forces you into some decisions of like, oh my god, like, you know, these two characters are both gonna die. They're both, a higher level than my other one, but I have to get rid of one of them because they just need healing. And so it makes you conscious of like, all right, well, I should take one lower level character with me so they can level up a little bit because I'm going to need to heal this other character later, and I can't be left with all these weaklings along like after I get rid of
Mhm.
one. And so it's kind of got this management aspect that wouldn't have been there if your characters were to just heal after each encounter. Um, and so yeah, and then when you heal by sacrificing a character, you also give some of the traits of that character to the next one. So if they have like an increased critical hit trait or something, that could be passed along. And so it sort of powers up your characters as well. And I would imagine there's a science to balancing out who you're sacrificing for what to really maximize some of the
Mhm.
character builds that you have. But I like it because it just makes it so that you can't, right, every battle is 3 characters, I'm just going to bring the same 3 every time, max them out.
Mhm.
It's easy to do, like, whereas this is like, someone's dead, they're gone forever. There are revival, another a way you can revive, but it's hard. And I like the way that this causes you to sort of build your team, um, which I guess would have been nice if there was more classes. I'll keep going back to that. It's like the one
Mhm.
thing this game
Yeah.
is missing. I just wish there was that variety in terms of classes, but it's very cool, and I'm definitely going to be playing more of this. This game might be the reason I might not go back to Curse of the Dead Gods as much as I would have otherwise.
That's
Um,
funny. Yeah, it genuinely looked cool and, like, the art is very striking. It's just looks really neat. I actually looked into it because, I was curious to see if it was on Steam, since I think, like, this kinda game is comfortable with a mouse to
mhm. I
control
don't
because 'cause you're
think
just,
it
like,
is,
kinda
right? I think
clicking
it's
on tiles.
console
It
only.
it it is on Steam, but it was not on sale.
Yeah.
So, that was I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll wait, maybe I'll just get it on PlayStation," but I mean, yeah, this game looked cool, I might pick it up, and
Yeah, well,
it
if you
sounds, like, really fucking stressful with, like, the way the units heal and stuff.
It is
Um
stressful, but you know it is cool. And for those listening to the podcast, on time, it is on sale right now on PSN. I gotta point out the sale because it's like $11 for the deluxe edition, and it's usually like 39.99. So, yeah, it's a good deal if you want it. But that's that one, Kate. Let's talk about your next game, which is something I've played a lot of too.
Yeah,
It's Monster
so
Train.
it is Monster Train. Speaking of good deals, at time of recording, Monster Train is on its happy 2-year anniversary, and is on a hella good sale. However, I think that only lasts, for, like, another, like, 20 hours, so by the time this comes out, it's not anymore, so I hope everyone,
Hope everyone
hope
took
everyone
advantage of
picked it
that.
up and took advantage of it, because Monster Train is delightful. It's just so stupid and fun, and the premise is I think it's, like, maybe its strongest point, is that you are these, like, demons, and you've gotta, like, defend hell or something. There's not a ton of lore going on, but the point is that you're kinda playing as the bad guys this time, like, you're gonna get a lot of gross monsters and, like, big grotesque things and, like, zombies and things, and then you're fighting these, like, holy angelic units, but it's like a card deck building game, but, like, the weird twist is that, like, you're just on a train, like, I don't know why, but you're just the train is so important, and there's, like, a positioning aspect to it, which you don't get from something like Slay the Spire, and I think that's the most interesting thing to me is that you don't just have, like, one character and then you have your deck. Your deck is, like, units and spells, and you're playing your units into, like, the 3 tiers of this really bougie
This
train
really
because like,
tall ass train
this
that
really
probably wouldn't
tallest
work in real
right?
life.
It's like, you've seen a double-decker bus, but you've never seen a triple-decker train.
It's a
Well, here
quadruple
it
decker
is.
train. There's the crystal
It
floor at the
is, you're
top.
right. It is, you're right. There's a crystal at the top. Um, but so, like, it's kinda neat 'cause you can only have a certain amount of units on each layer of the train, and there's that kind of ideas, like, do you just stack, like I often pretty much just, like, stack one layer and, like, this is my fuck you up layer, and if someone happens to get past, then there's a, like there's the bouncer at the 2nd layer just in case, and he's,
Yeah.
sitting there with his arms crossed, but if someone ends up there, he's ready to take you out. Um, so yeah, this game is neat. I think as a deck builder, it works incredibly well. I think as a roguelike, it works incredibly well. There's tons of variety. It starts you off pretty small in terms of what you have access to, but you build up like card pools and different types of classes that have unique card pools so incredibly quickly. Like the dopamine hit on this game is outrageous. It's just bombarding you with new stuff at all times. And if you're not getting new cards, you've ranked up. And now your cards have like gold backs because you won a match. And then now there's like a new challenge to do. And there's just so much content going on in this game that in a weird way, that's kind of my, like, negative for it, is that there's just so much, and you unlock I think there's, like, 6 or 7 different classes that or different, like, unit types that you have, and you select 2 for every run, 1 to be your primary and 1 to be your secondary, so you can have some interesting synergies depending on what types of cards you put together. But I think if I had to say one negative thing about it is that a couple of the later classes you unlock are relatively complicated. Like there's one that's all about units that only can survive for a certain amount of turns and they die, but then you can like replay them. And so there's a lot of managing that way. And then there's another one that gives you like a new currency that's these like crystals and you have to play them to your train and depending on how many crystals you have in certain areas it'll augment. characters. And I think sometimes, like, for me, this kind of game is something I play while I'm, like, watching YouTube or kind of doing something else, and it's a chill, relaxing. And sometimes you're just like, your brain has to be so switched on to manage these, like, more complicated classes,
Mhm.
and it can be just, like, a little bit demanding for what I like from these kind of games, but that's not a complaint of the game, it's just, like, that's my style and kinda what I'm looking for with, like, a deck building kinda game. Like, Slay the Spire, you can just, like, brain off, breeze through it, and
Mhm.
it's great once you're comfortable and, like, the cards well enough.
Yeah.
With this kinda game, like, you're constantly like, "Ooh, wait, should I play this first?" Or like, "Ooh, do I really wanna add that card to my deck?" And I think it is maybe the best deck builder I've played in terms of, like, how smart it is, but sometimes I'm not smart, and I just wanna play the funny train game.
Yeah, yeah. I think, you hit on a few interesting things, right? I think this game, what's so interesting about it and the reason it stands out is because of that positioning factor that you're
Mhm.
talking about. Like, I know certain card games that they have, like, lanes or, your monsters are across from
Mhm.
each other or what. But this game is really it's almost like a tower defense game in certain ways. Like, you're
Yeah.
guarding different floors and the way the enemies kind of file in at the bottom of the train, and then you have to prevent them from moving up by having your units positioned. And each floor of the train also has like a capacity meter. So like bigger
Mhm.
monsters will take more space. So you can have maybe like less units on a certain floor. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. And to your point on the complexity too, I find that the one thing about this game that is maybe my biggest negative is I just find it's very tough to keep track of sort of the damage and like the attack order and stuff sometimes. Like
Mhm.
you were comparing to Slay the Spire, it's a well-known example, but I find in Slay the Spire it's really easy to sort of calculate how the turn is going to play out and where the damage is going to come from and what you're doing. Whereas in this game, there's certain instances when there's like a shitload of enemies and I've got some more complicated units and I'm just kind of like, well, I see the little icon down here means this guy's gonna die, so I don't really know exactly how much damage all my units will take, but I'm just gonna click turns over because I mean, what else can you do? And I feel
Mhm.
like there's an element of like watching this game play out a little bit instead of feeling like you know exactly what's gonna happen. Um, so that's not maybe great, but that's like the only complaint I really have because you're right, like the tower defense kind of element is awesome. I love the way that you pick two different factions and the deck synergizes and you get
Mhm.
cards from both, like because there's so many interesting combinations you can have, and I think that really adds to the replayability of the game. And also the fact that your cards kind of level up and get different abilities as you go. Like you can have you know certain cards that'll just get so powerful at the end. Like you get I think your leader cards or what are they called? Commander cards or
Yeah, you get, like, a leader, and so it comes with, like, the main faction you pick, and it starts out and it's nice too because you get always options, so it's like, do you want him to, be a little bit more defensive or a little bit more aggressive? And you can pick, like, the offensive on your first choice, and then he'll upgrade a couple times throughout a run, so your next one, you can go with the defensive if you wanted, or you could stick with that aggressive path. And there is, like, nice variety, and then there's also, like, a way that you can kind of there's a DLC that came with the game, or at least I have
mm,
access to it,
hmm.
and so it lets you, like, sacrifice units to give some of their traits to
Oh,
another
interesting.
unit you have, which is really interesting. And so, you can kinda do that where you'll grab a unit, it's like, I don't really he doesn't really fit into my deck right now, but he's got a good trait that I can sacrifice later to something. And so there's just a lot of mechanics going on with this game, and the presentation is very easy. I think all the cards do a good job of telling you what they do. It's easy to pick, like, you're just one card here and then you get like one other card here, and the way you progress is really nice, but it definitely can get a little bit cluttered, like you said, with just when you're actually doing the battles in the train, and then also just there's so many cards going on. And yeah, like, and then, someone has quick, which makes them go first, and someone else has multi-attack, and someone else has, like, a defensive thing, and it's like it's just a lot, but it's just I think there's just so much variety in the game that, like, that's what happens when you've just got a million systems going on. And they're all good things, they're all adding a lot, I don't think there's anything I'd wanna take away, but it's just not as chill and relaxing as this genre often ends up being.
Yeah, yeah. That level of complication, you're right, but I don't know. I
Mhm.
really like Monster Train. Like it's right up
Mhm.
there with the other deck builders I've played for sure. Like I would recommend this to anybody who likes deck building games. I don't see how you could play this as a fan of that genre and not enjoy yourself. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you finally played it.
Absolutely. I'm glad and, like, I'm still aboard the train, like, don't worry, like,
Still
I'm on
aboard,
board
all aboard.
still aboard all aboard, like,
Do
it is
this,
definitely a
whatever.
game choo choo. Yeah, it is definitely a game I will, like, just kinda come back to every now and again, it's easy to pick up and play. You hop on, you do a run, you do half a run, whatever.
Hmm.
And, it's just kind of fun. Like, I'm at the point in the game too where there's still so much to unlock that, like, oftentimes I'll just pick random. Like, just give me
Yeah,
2
yeah.
random factions and I'll just, I'll see what I can make do with what I've got. And 9 times out of 10, there are some cool combinations, some things that you end up doing that you didn't necessarily know going into it, but you get a card later and it's like, "Oh, hang on, that actually would work well with, this other card I've already got." And then you're just, you're full steam ahead.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think it's delightful. I think it's just such a smart game. It seems like it's gonna be so silly, and it is. Like, it's got a lot of cute stuff and, like, you'll run into, little events as you're going and it's like, oh, someone's got a funny story and it's like, do you help this person? And you pick them up on the train and you get into the unit, or it's like, oh, don't help them and something else happens. And
And they
there's
attack
a
you
lot
or
of
yeah.
like, yeah, there's a lot of like cute little random stuff that goes on. Um and it's just delightful. It is a smart, fun game, but, you know, you gotta have the brain power to to go into
Exactly.
it.
Well, there you go, folks. It's three smart, fun games today. Oh, they're all kind of similar in weird ways too. Curse of the Dead Gods, Monster
Mhm.
Train, Other Side, all kind of roguelikes, all have
Yeah,
different level up
rollways.
progression. That wasn't planned, but we picked a good synergizing group of games today. Um, so without further ado, let's get into the second half of today's show because we are already nearly over 45 minutes into the show.
Oof.
We're going to talk about level up systems. And I don't know if this is really related to what we're talking about. I guess it's kind of related to those games before, but obviously, leveling up is very common in video games and it's a big topic. So, is there a place that you'd like to start, Kate? How do you want to tackle this broad topic?
Jeez, I mean, I think you gotta break it down because there's so many different ways that a game can incorporate leveling up, right? Like, I think, maybe skill trees is one of the big things that comes to mind, or just physically, like,
Hmm.
experience bar, next level. Um,
Well, let's start there actually before you say anything else because I did write
mhm,
down sort of the two standard level up
okay.
systems that I could think of, and those are exactly what you just said right
Mhm,
there. So you've got the standard, and it's usually more in like an action game, I guess. You'd have like a skill tree. So,
mhm,
and I find like oftentimes in these games, the examples I wrote down are like Borderlands or Spider-Man or God of War or
mhm,
Dishonored. You kind of have these skill trees and you unlock points as you level up, and by the end of the game, if you're playing well, you'll probably get maybe 2/3 of the skill tree unlocked, and you have some agency in what you pick, but it's kind of laid out for you for the most part. And the other version of that, like you said, in the standard RPG, you just hit an experience level, you level up, stats increase. Sometimes a thing will happen, like you'll get a new ability or something. So this will be like Pokemon or Persona or Dragon Quest. Yeah.
mhm,
And so those are like the two standards that I thought of. Yeah.
mhm. Okay, well, we'll jump into it. Let's do the skill tree first, if we have a couple examples of that. And I kinda picked a funny one for this. Well, I've got 2 actually that I wanted to shout out. I really like, the skill tree in Salt and Sanctuary, which was a game. It's one of those kinda 2D, like, Souls-like kinda games. But what I found really interesting about this is that it was like this weird shape, and you sort of went and picked. And it was simple, but what it did that a lot of skill trees don't do is that you kinda look at the ends of them and you think like, "Oh, I wanna make my way to that." Like, that's kinda my end goal, and so I'm gonna pick stuff that lines up with that tree. Or sometimes they're just even, like, allocated differently, like, here's the, like, defense tree, here's the, like, healing tree, and here's
The
the
Borderlands
attack
method.
tree, the Borderlands method. But with Salt and Sanctuary, like, they they kind of had that where it branched off into sort of like weapon types so that you didn't have to pick up, like, random things that didn't help you. But it also had, like, a system where each pip would be something. So say, like, this is, increases my health by 10%, and it would have multiple pips on it, so you could do put 1 point into that if you wanted, and then move on to the next thing, or you could put, like, 3 points into that as something you really wanted. So it just had a lot of flexibility in terms of, like, you still had that end goal of, like, I'm working towards this path, but you could choose if you wanted to stop and really invest in something along the way,
Mm,
or if that was just a placeholder to get you to that next spot. So I thought that was really nice, and then it also had what I think is the most important thing a skill tree could have, is a way to reallocate your skills
yes.
if you want to, because the thing about skill trees is that once you're kind of working towards a path, you're sort of locked into it, 'cause it's always the best to make it to the end and get that highest tier thing versus, like, you know, put a little bit in everything. But it's more fun to have variety. So any game that lets you reallocate your skills is like a 10 out of 10 skill tree already.
I agree with that for sure because it removes that stress, right? Because a lot of times,
Mhm.
I know you just kind of brought it up a little bit, but it's like you'll get your first couple of levels and you'll be like, look, I got to plan out exactly what I want by the end because I need to start putting my points in the right place. And then so you're an hour or two into a game and you'll be like, well, I need to make a decision on what sort of weapon I want to use before I've even tried out half the types because I need to worry about not investing in the sword tree if I'm not using a sword or something. So you're
Mhm.
right. Reallocation is like the best. And to me, that's like a version of grinding too, right? Because if you can reallocate, you don't have to grind to like get points for other part of the tree. And I know we always talk about like games that force you to grind, not what you want to do. And
Mhm.
so, yeah.
And also too, it's like, it's a big decision sometimes. You start a game, you don't always know necessarily how you wanna play. Like, maybe you go into it and like, I typically like swords, I'm gonna pick swords, but, oh, in this game, I just happen to really like being an archer. Shit, like, I
Hmm.
wish I was
Hmm.
in the archer tree, but I've already invested in swords, and then it's gonna be useless, and so it just kinda removes that element of, like, I'm not having as much fun with the game as I could be, and, like, you get kinda weirdly penalized sometimes.
Yeah. I think so we're talking about skill trees and whatnot too. Like my favorite
Mhm.
example of a skill tree, and it's something that I have brought up kind of on the show before, but I love the Final Fantasy X sphere grid. This thing
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah.
my favorite level up system. It's kind of like a skill tree, right? But what it is it's each character sort of is on this massive grid, and it's almost like the Nazca lines, like those drawings in the ground.
Yeah,
It looks like
yeah.
designs like that, and it's kind of like a maze, and you're going from node to node on the maze. You can go like left or right, or you have to follow them in a sequential order. But depending, kind of you have free agency in the way you want to move through it, or like what direction you want to go. And there's different bonuses for each character depending if you like what nodes you move through, basically. And some of them are locked off later by like progression in the game. Like you have to have a certain get to a certain point before you can progress in certain areas, but it gives you that
Mhm.
freedom while also making sure you're sort of on the right track. Like you can't give yourself something really useless because oftentimes it won't be on the grid in like a certain character's area if they're focused on magic or something. They won't have a lot of strength, but at the same time it's flexible and it's sort of guiding you like a skill tree would. But I just found that it's not quite as prescribed, like your exact path of what you're going to be progressing through. And you can do like fun customizations where it's like, this is the white mage, she's got a lot of healing, but if you want to add some offensive stuff to her, you can take her down a certain part of the grid, and you have that freedom to do so. So I
Mhm.
always come back to that as like such a great system. Although now that I think about it, I'm not sure that you can reallocate your points on the sphere grid. So I might have to rethink that.
I mean, I guess if your skill tree is good enough, ideally, you don't wanna reallocate your points, but, just having that level of flexibility, even if it's just one time, even if it's just
Yeah.
you get one freebie,
Yeah,
so be it.
exactly.
Um,
What about more
yeah,
standard kind of systems, like the
so
Pokemon style?
right. So Pokemon was the first thing I thought about for this, obviously, because it's just you know, those numbers ticking up and getting to high levels is always cool, but the coolest way to make that happen is to physically have change in your character. And so the evolutions of Pokemon is just the coolest way of translating that level gain into something like so tangible that like, you know, your Pokemon, like you started with Squirtle and now you've got a Blastoise by the end of the game. That's cool as fuck.
Hmm.
Um so Pokemon is obviously like the, you know, I would say like the king of like the champion, that kind of system. But I will say that it has been defeated in my mind by Digimon Cyber
Oh,
Sleuth.
I'm so glad you brought this game up.
Because it's just Pokemon on steroids. So the problem with Pokemon that I run into is that I want to use a bunch of Pokemon because it's so cool when they're leveling up. But you can only have 1 Pokemon out at a time, or you can have 6 in your party, and even with the XP share, that's 6 Pokemon that are leveling, and that's limiting when there are, like, you know, 700 and however many in the game at any time.
Yeah, and limiting too when if you want to bring a new guy into your party, sure you have the XP share, but it might be you might have caught it like 5 hours ago and it's 15 levels behind the rest of your party or something.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an element of, like, you have to grind if you want to use a lot of Pokemon, and, like, the best strategy is to just not use more than 6 ever and just stick with your same team forever. But in Digimon in Digimon, you have your team that's currently with you, and then you have all your team in whatever the equivalent of the PC is in that game. And the ones on your team get more experience, but the ones in reserve are also getting experience. So you can't go like 20 minutes in that game without something being ready to evolve, and then you get to choose what they evolve into out of like a few different options. Some you need like extra requirements to unlock. I think
Yeah,
sometimes there's a
yeah.
little bit of a barrier, but typically you have at least 2 or 3 choices, and you're filling out your, like, whatever the Digidex equivalent of the Pokédex is, like, half the time it's not catching Pokemon, it's just like, "Oh, I haven't evolved into whatever that silhouette is, I'll pick that option because it's gonna be cool, whatever it is," and, like, you're just constantly having, like, the monsters be the forefront, and, like, leveling up isn't about like, obviously, the stats you increase are, you know, are good and getting new moves is important, but it's just constantly like, "Oh, transformation, new Digimon," and, like,
Hmm.
that feels like really fun progression.
Yeah, it does. You're always seeing something new. You're always, like you said, it completely solves that problem of the Pokemon thing where you're using the same Pokemon all the time. Like you're able
Mhm.
to just switch up so freely playing Cyber Sleuth. And I know there's some problems that come in with like making sure you have the right guys in your party, but just on the merit
Mhm.
of a level up system, like it is so flexible.
Mhm.
I just want to throw another name out there too when you're talking about leveling up and getting progression in terms of like evolutions. Gotta shout out Fire Emblem, especially the old Fire Emblem games when you
Mhm.
kind of get to that level 20 and you give your knight's crest to
Yeah, to
whoever, like
Oswin.
to Oswin.
Yeah. Yeah.
You like he becomes this big tank and it's like it's awesome to watch
Yeah.
those animations. And like the art in Fire Emblem, something we've talked about before, but those classic GBA sort of Fire Emblem, oh my god,
Mhm.
to die for, to die for.
Yeah.
um
It's cool.
I was gonna say I've got an example. So Digimon is such a good example of not only the progression in terms of like changing your party and leveling up, but you also said it's great because it allows you to get experience for your team in reserve. And so
Mhm.
you don't, not only are you able to change your team a lot, but you also have like next to no grinding that you need to do in order
Mhm.
to progress your levels. And as a contrast to that, I wanted to bring up a game, Octopath Traveler. And I can't
Mhm.
remember if I've talked too much about it on the show, but this game is exactly the opposite of something like Digimon, where you have obviously Octopath. The idea was you have 8 different characters. They're kind of on these separate storylines, but they kind of converge. And you have 8 different stories you're playing at once. And the concept is really cool. But in practice, I played this game for 50 plus hours, and the problem is that you can only have 4 characters in your party. So once you get up to that mark of having 8, you your characters that you don't bring with you are just not getting anything. And so by the
Mhm.
time you make it through, every character has 4 acts within their story, and so there's, I guess, technically like 4 parts to every character, times 8. What is that, 32? I can't do math. But either way, by the time you get through like the first half of them, you're gonna have you're either gonna run into two problems, which is that you're gonna have four members that are just like juiced out of their mind, really strong, and you're going through their stories like nothing's the matter. But then you're gonna have the other four sitting there getting no experience, and so if you want to go and experience, their part of the game, you have to then sub out one of your strong guys and bring this weakling along with you. Or if you're cycling them all out as you go, I mean, sure, they're going to be even, but you're going to run into huge difficulty spikes where it's like, okay, now I'm done like everyone's second chapter. Now I'm going on to the third chapter for every character, but I'm like way behind in terms of level recommendation because I've been working on kind of evenly distributing this experience. And the game itself, just I got to that point and I was like, man, it's just not worth it. Like I'm never going to get the full picture of this game. Like I'm just never going to put the time in to make sure all these characters are strong enough. And I just wish there was some sort of like EXP share thing to what was otherwise such a good game. And that the level up system in Octopath just totally killed it for me. In terms of like the idea of playing through all these different stories and seeing how they connect.
That's a shame too, because it's one of those things where it's like in a lot of games your units are optional, right? It's like you don't have to use every Pokemon. In fact, like using every Pokemon would be like like
Yeah,
extreme,
be
but
stupid.
like in Octopath, you all 8 characters are prominent, right? Like they're all important units. It's
Oh,
not
there is
like
no main
you
character. Yeah.
exactly. It's not like, in something like Fire Emblem, you have a pool of 30 units, you're intended to, maybe focus on 15 and like the extra characters are intended to give you options to craft the team you want to use. But in Octopath, yeah, like all 8 characters are intended to be played. So having that barrier to using one and playing through like the hunter's story, but they're level 1 and you've brought in your like 3 other juice guys to carry them through their own story kind of feels like it's at a disconnect with the way the narrative wants to be structured.
Like if I was to recommend someone that game, I'd be like, look, you just gotta play it. You gotta pick the four characters you want and just use them, unless you're gonna invest all this time. But it's like the level up system literally is preventing you from, from playing the game. Essentially, you're missing half the game if you don't. So just an interesting example, and so opposite to Digimon, like we were saying before.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. What would you say is I actually have another example too for kind of the classic level up system.
Okay.
Not Digimon, but I think Mass Effect actually does a really good job of sort of making that classic system really interesting. Like you are just gaining experience points and leveling up your character, but then instead of um you know, unlocking a level 30 the same attack every time depending on your class and depending where you can spend your points. It's kind of like a hybrid system. You can spend your points on different abilities and there's only like 3 or 4 per class, but you can choose sort of where to allocate those points. And so it's a little bit more flexible than just simply getting stat increases. But there's that little bit of customization too. So I think it does a pretty good job.
Yeah, those high resistance and so I kind of focus as well a little bit. I think those are the 2 like classic main systems, but I think we've seen a couple other like emergent systems come out and just some games kind of do their own thing, which I like is their progression and technically their level up, just not in those simplistic ways. So I kind of want to give a couple shout outs and
Mhm.
Elder Scrolls Oblivion
Oh wow.
is what I wanted to say. So I loved Oblivion. Maybe I should talk about it one day on the show, but it was a huge game for me back in high school.
Yeah, you
And
should. I would love to hear about it because I played that game one time. I rented it for my Xbox, and I was like, I
yeah,
hate this game so
so
much.
I'll tell you a fun Oblivion little note for me is that the only time I've ever pulled an all-nighter by myself is the first night I had Oblivion.
That's awesome.
I was playing on this shitty old laptop, and I was gonna play in bed for a little bit and go to bed. I ended up getting so into it, I played through the night and had to go to, like, high school the next morning and felt like shit. But it was so worth it. So, one of the cool things about Oblivion is that, like, it's kinda got, like, all the stats like your typical RPG. But how you level up in that game is by physically doing that thing. So you don't
Mhm.
gain a level and then have a point that you just put into archery. You level archery whenever you use your bow. And so the joke in Oblivion is that, like, one of the things is athletics, and that's, like, running and jumping, and so the joke in Oblivion is that you just jump everywhere you go. You're never not jumping because it's upgrading your athletics.
Right.
So it's kind of a silly system in that, it's a little exploitable in some funny ways, but I just think it's so clever because like, if you're doing that thing, like, you don't need a point to put into it. It's like, you blacksmithed, you leveled up your blacksmith and you got better at it. You used a sword, now you're better at swords. It was a very organic feeling because that's kind of how, getting better at stuff works in real life.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? You don't, like, do a day at work and you're like, "Oh, perfect. I'm gonna put a point into, like, analyzing TV shows better." It's like, "No, what?"
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting.
So
It's interesting you bring that up because immediately what came to my head is something like Stardew Valley, where they have
mhm,
that exact same system. It's like you can level up your fishing, but you only do that by actually doing the activity. And so,
mhm.
yeah, I think that's a great example. I'd be interested to know, now that you bring it up, is Oblivion the first game to use that type of system, or is there something else that did it before?
I'm not sure. You know what? I'm not sure how the older Elder Scrolls did it because Oblivion is the 4th game, so I'm not
Hmm.
sure. It was just my first experience, but it was striking to me as just something new I'd never had. So I enjoyed that. And then the other one I want to shout out because obviously I've got to throw it in some way or another is I love the Souls style of leveling up. It is your
Hmm.
classic, put points into stats, stats make you better. So it's very simple in that term, but I love the mechanic of using, your souls, whether it's Dark Souls or your Blood Echoes in Bloodborne, or even a lot of other games like Hollow Knight's got your Geo. And I love the way that you collect them from everything you do. And then it's just the simplicity of the choice of, like, your souls are your currency for leveling, but they're also your currency for buying stuff, right? So you're kind of prioritizing what that resource goes to, and it's not just the simple of, like, I have enough points to level up. It's like, well, I use my souls, I bought this stuff that's helpful, so now I can't level up anymore. And then that with the added complexity of that you lose your souls when you die, and then you have the chance of collecting them if you can make it back to where you died. So the leveling up is kind of directly married with your progression as, like, how well you're doing as a player. And so it's kind of controversial because, it sucks to lose your souls. It's fucking awful and you're like, I just killed a boss. I've got so many, like, I've been, like, on fire. And I died, and then on my way back I, like, fell off a ledge and, like, oh, they're gone forever. It feels like
Yeah,
shit.
it can have some
It's like
moments like that for sure.
and have some moments where it's like that progression is done. But I always kind of think about it in terms of, like, when you die in a lot of games, you just go back to your checkpoint, right?
Hmm.
It's like you go
Hmm.
back to whatever save you had before, and, like, you lost that time as well. It's not anything new that you can lose your progression,
Yeah,
but it gives you that chance of getting it back.
yeah. Well,
And
I think. Oh, go
it's
ahead.
kind of neat. No, no, no. It's
I was
yeah,
just gonna say, I think the coolest thing about the whole level up system in the Souls games is actually just how iconic it is to that type of game,
yeah.
and like the you could argue that the way that mechanic, like the level up system works in those games, is like the defining feature of how that game is meant to be played, or one of the very crucial features that makes it distinct. And I think that is like very unique because not a lot of games are like built around one of their core things being how you level up, in a way
Mhm.
that those games are. So that is a really good point. Um, I mean, it's becoming so common now, right? But
Mhm.
especially back before the kind of Soulsborne genre was a genre and not just a line of games. I think it was so unique for that series.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's neat how other games have adapted it, like Hollow Knight, for example,
Hmm.
it's not your level up, but it is your currency that you use for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so it's not directly tied to leveling up, but it has been adapted in another way, and so it's
Hmm.
interesting to see kind of how a lot of game systems, I guess, are, intertwined, and leveling up is something that, it can just be you get stronger so that you can fight stronger stuff, but it also can be kind of, a little bit more
Hmm.
tied to how
Hmm.
the game works in general.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other examples of different kinds of systems? I
Um,
only have one, and I don't know if we really
okay.
want to talk about it too much, but it's kind of the I don't think either of us necessarily love this system, but it's like what if leveling up isn't anything to do with the game? What if it's like these battle passes? It's kind of the cosmetic leveling up, you know? Like I'm thinking all the battle royales, and I mean I've been playing a lot of Fortnite recently. Like it's just been a lot of fun without the building in it. But I mean you're leveling up, but it doesn't have anything to do with your character's progression or your strength or your stats. Like it's leveling up something external, which is a battle pass and getting cosmetics or different unlocks and stuff for
It's
your
almost
game.
like markers of your time spent in the game
Yeah, yeah, and
more
there's
than
certain
anything.
challenges. I mean, Fortnite, you're earning experience all the time for everything. Like you're
Mhm.
talking about dopamine hits. Like that game, you can't like, turn around and look at a tree without gaining 10,000 experience for, doing something. And so it really gives you those dopamine hits. And it's interesting how it can be so compelling to, quote unquote, level up and unlock those other type of things when it doesn't really mean anything towards your character getting stronger in the game. And so I think I don't know, like it's not something that I love, like I don't typically fall for a lot of the I don't want to say fall, it makes it sound disingenuous, but I don't typically get into like a lot of that battle pass progression type of stuff in a lot of games, but certain ones it's just like there is something nice about leveling up even if it's just for something sort of secondary.
Yeah, you make a good point. I wouldn't have originally, thought about it, but you're right, that is a big aspect to a lot of games, and, I was even joking around with a friend playing Destiny the other day, and, the season's almost come to an end, and there's, a season you can buy, the bigger season pass,
Mhm.
but there's just a free one inherent in the game that, everything you do, you get, points for your season and you're leveling that up, and then every, couple levels along the tracker, there's something you get. And I was like, "Oh shit, we've gotta play a lot. The season is over in a week, and, I better play a lot because I wanna get that stuff on the pass." And it's like, am I ever gonna use that weapon on the pass? No.
Yeah, but
Like,
you want it.
but I want it. And it's so weird what about that does mentally to your brain, and I think it's almost like a fear of missing out more than anything. Is like, "Well, I've gotta get it because it's exclusive right now. This is the only time I can get it." And that's different, when you sit down and level up in a game, you can do that anytime. There's no restrictions on when you level up in a game. It's just when you sit down to play it. But those season passes and those battle passes, it's like, well, you know, they're only gonna last so long, and what if I don't have it? But
You
I
know what it
want
is? It's
it.
you know what it is? It's like
Yeah.
time sensitive grinding is what it
Yeah,
is.
it is.
I don't know if it's a good thing, but it definitely is a thing. And I think that it's hard to play games, you know, regularly these days without having been, have that feeling with at least something. Like
Yeah.
I don't think like I said, either of us really play a lot of games that have this, but I mean, we both just laid out a pretty clear example of something we've been playing a lot of recently, and here we are.
Exactly. It is deadly, and you can see how, people, end up spending so much time, and they're designed too, where, you're never gonna make it to the end unless you, dedicate you got a schedule you've dedicated to this game, because they go on almost forever otherwise,
Hmm.
but,
Hmm.
there's that juicy thing right at the end, and you get another level, and you're like, "Ooh, what's this
Yeah,
for
the
me? A
characters at the
present?"
end, characters at the end, but I gotta unlock these 6 gun skins and like an emote
Yeah.
first.
Exactly, exactly, and, especially because 'cause they're online too, and it's like you see other people running around with the emote, and it's like, "Oh, I wanna get that, look how much
Hmm.
fun that looks," and yeah, it is it is
It's addictive.
it's manipulative in a way, I'm kinda torn 'cause on one hand, it's fun, but on the other hand, it is definitely a manipulative tactic to make you play more,
Oh,
100%,
definitely, definitely. Yeah, as
but,
is forced grinding in RPGs,
yeah, true,
in a weird way.
I think I only got one other one. I think this might be the most interesting one you've just
Okay,
brought up.
yeah.
But I've got one other one that I wanna shout out just because I like a particular aspect of it, and this is actually Dead Cells. So,
Mm.
it's got a similar kind of progression to a game like, Curse of the Dead Gods that we were just playing that, you do your run and you amass some of the currencies, and then at the end of the run, you decide you want buy this new weapon, and now that weapon's unlocked for future runs. It's pretty standard how
Yeah, Enter the
a
Gungeon
lot
is
of
like that.
work.
Yeah.
Engines like that, yeah, exactly. It's pretty standard. But what I like about Dead Cells is that it's got the currency where in various parts of the run, you get these shops that you can spend your cells in. And when you unlock it for the first time, it does go in your pool of available items, but you get one right away. So you unlock it in the middle of a run, and then you have it and you immediately use it, as opposed to it just going in your pool for later.
That's a
And
way better.
that's
Wow.
it's so fun because, sometimes, like, it's just way more exciting to get to use it than like, "Oh, I sure hope I see that, and, like, 4 runs later,
Right,
maybe I
yeah.
will."
That flamethrower looked really cool. I hope I find it one day.
Yeah, exactly, but also you can kinda be a little strategic with it in the sense of, like, they cost a certain amount of souls, so you don't just, like, buy it and here's 50 souls at one time or 50 cells at one time. It's a bar you put them into. So what I used to do is I'd put things and I'd get them to like one left. I only need one more cell to put into this left and I got it. And it's like, well, I don't need it this run. It's not going to be helpful. So I'm going to leave it at one and then come back next time and then put that 1 point in. Now all of a sudden I've got it whenever I want it. So it's a way to unlock things, but it's also a way of, like, just choosing, "I wanna use this right now,"
Yeah, yeah.
which I thought
Interesting.
was just such a clever way of having that type of system, which I would say is kind of like leveling because that's what your progression is working towards in that style of game.
Yeah, that is a version of leveling up, I would say too. Like
Mhm.
it's I don't know, like what is leveling up if not progressing your character in some way.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Exactly.
I can go with that. Well, we would love to hear what your thoughts on leveling up systems are in games. What are some of your favorites? Do you agree with us about what we've said today? Um, is Digimon Cyber Sleuth the best example of a traditional JRPG experience system?
I
The
think
answer
it
is
might
yes.
be.
The answer is yes. But
Answer is
as
yes.
as we said, we would love to hear your answers or anything else you want to write into us as well. We love stories, comments, questions, all that good stuff. And you can send it to circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com, or get in touch with us on Twitter at CNSPod. Of course, all those links are available wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. But before we go, we do have a listener mail question to answer, as we always do at the end of the podcast, which I hope I didn't confirm with you, but you have it open, right, to read out loud?
Oh boy, I sure hope I do. Um,
Because
I
I
mean,
do
I've
if you don't.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, you know what? Why don't you roll with this one?
All right.
Stated at the top of the show, my
Man,
admin for this
yeah,
has been
just
a 10 out of 10.
it's all right. I'm picking up the slack today. Our question today is from Jay, and it's a simple one. It's catchiest title screen music. So what game would you like to shout out for this? This is God, where do you even start? There's so many games
Okay.
with iconic title screens.
So there's two things my mind immediately went to. You were playing that beat 'em up game that just had the best fucking
Streets of
soundtrack.
Rage 2 or
Streets
4,
of
4,
Rage.
yeah.
Yeah. Streets of Rage, whatever that was the absolute bomb. Um, but as I was thinking about this a little bit more, and especially thinking about Oblivion for the other topic that we had, was the Skyrim. When you
Hmm,
open up Skyrim, and like, it's one of those games everybody's played it, but you remember that song that kicks in. It is an 80-piece choir
that's intense.
and then a lead singer, and that, like, like, the chanting and just the atmosphere of it is incredible. They didn't need to get an 80-piece choir to record the opening, like, title music, but they fucking did, and it's awesome.
How can you argue with that? I mean, I've actually, confession, I've barely played Skyrim in my life. I've
Mhm.
never played it myself, only watched others.
Mhm.
Streets of Rage 4 was the first thing I wrote down too, although I'm
Yep.
not going to go with it just because I think the soundtrack as a whole is just amazing.
Mhm.
And the best song is the character select song, not the title screen. So
Right,
I
that's
can't,
true, that one is the
yeah,
bomb.
so I can't go with that. You know what I thought recently too of is Paper Mario. There's like that whistling in
Yeah.
the theme song, which I just played that recently and that was in my head. But you know the one I'm gonna go with, and
Mhm.
is maybe just because we went and saw this movie, but I think the Uncharted theme song on those title screens
Yeah.
is also iconic. And I don't know if it's orchestrated quite the same way as Skyrim, but it is like, quite a, you know, orchestral sound, I guess, to a lot of it. There's like the
Mhm.
drums in the background and there's all different kinds of instruments. And so Uncharted, I think, it's just like so
You know what?
inspiring, like you want to go
That's
traveling
a
to somewhere tropical when you play.
Yeah,
Uncharted.
that's a good pick, like, it sets the tone so well, and you're right, like, we're watching that movie and it picks up in the movie and you're just like, "Ah," it's so exciting that, like, nostalgia wave floods through you, it's iconic, it's like you'd hear that anywhere and you'd know, like, "Oh, that's Uncharted, that's
Yeah,
awesome."
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those are good ones. And like we said, you can write in and let us know your favorite title screen song as well. So I'm sure, obviously, there's so many that are amazing.
Yeah,
Shout out to Persona, of course.
of course.
Another great musical game. But once again, thank you everybody for joining us on this episode of the show today. We promise Kate will have our webcam back for next time. Like I said at the top, we be expecting a bonus episode partway through next week with our review on Uncharted. The movie was starring Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg, and a bunch of other people. What was that? It wasn't Antonio Banderas, was it? Is it?
It was,
It was
yeah, he
Antonio
was in it,
Banderas,
yep,
right? Yeah.
he's in it.
God, what a movie. Yeah, look forward to that, and we'll be back again next week with the news show, everybody. But until next time, I'm sure Kate's waving, and I'll wave too. We'll see you
I
next time.
am, I promise.